In the last stream, we were working on finally upgrading our integrated dynamics storage system and replacing it entirely with an applied energistics 2 system. We set up the ME crafting terminal, our advanced inscriber, and right at the end of the last episode, we put down this wireless access point along with these 6 wireless boosters to allow us to use our wireless crafting terminal and access the contents of all of our storage inventories, at least the 3 over here, anywhere we want, within reason, and that reason is within 30 meters or 30 blocks of this wireless access point. Now, there are a few things I want to do today to increase that range. One of the suggestions that has been given to me is that we should move the wireless access point to a more central location in the base. I do think that that is a sensible idea, because this works on area, so it's 30 meters, I believe, in each direction from the wireless access point, and so putting it in the center of the base gives us more coverage, because right now a lot of our coverage is kind of off in the void and isn't really usable coverage. And on top of that, I think, also want to go ahead and finally get rid of these chests. I left them going in the last episode because I wanted them to still be connected to our integrated dynamic system, but after looking around a bit between streams, I really don't think that there's anything in those drawers that is being exported over to this system. I think a lot of what we have and use, and a lot of what we import and export, has its own drawer space, right? Like the andesite alloy here has its own drawers, our planks over here, they have their own drawers. I think everything that needs to be used and exported by the integrated dynamic system is already available, and so I think we can quite safely turn all of these chests into one ME drive, this guy right here, with a couple of ME disks inside of it, so we can store all of our items digitally and not really have to worry so much about the amount of space that we have in these chests. I also do want to do some more automation today. I want to kind of pivot over a couple of our bits of automation to Applied Energistics 2. For instance, I do want to get a pattern provider onto the side of this pressure chamber so that we can use Applied Energistics to request the production of these mechanisms as opposed to just having them made passively. And then I also want to finally automate these 3 pressure chambers over here to produce capacitors, transistors, and the unassembled PCBs automatically as well using Applied Energistics 2. But before we do any of that, we have a couple of things to address. The first is, Isaac, why in the world are there so many hostile mobs on the bottom of your base, and why is there a horrendous looking wall of netherrack around that platform over there? The reason for that is that another thing that I would like to do in today's stream is I would like to look at setting up an automatic mob farm. One of the benefits of that automatic mob farm is that it's also going to bring in ender pearls automatically, which is also going to allow us to craft even more wireless boosters, which is going to increase the range on our wireless access point even further. But it also just means that we don't have to keep going back to the nether every single time we want ender pearls. It also means we don't have to do any wacky stuff in terms of getting rotten flesh or gunpowder or anything like that. We're just going to start to get all of that stuff passively. To do that, we're going to follow a very similar strategy to what we did when we wanted passive mobs. For the passive mobs, we built a platform really far out, and we used the Delightful Dirt. The Delightful Dirt was acquired by getting one of these golden eggs, and the golden egg there was from the nutritious chicken feed. So we took this, we fed it to a chicken, and we used that to get the golden egg. The golden egg allowed us to make Delightful Dirt, which rapidly spawns passive mobs. It turns out we can do the exact same thing, but this time we have to make this cursed chicken feed that to a chicken that will get us a rotten egg, and that rotten egg will allow us to create Dreadful Dirt, which will then do the opposite. It will rapidly spawn hostile mobs. And if we can set up a system to automatically kill those hostile mobs, we're going to get mob drops automatically, which I think is going to be ideal. Now, in terms of getting the GM chicken feed cursed here, the only thing we're missing is a single spider eye. We do have these 4 buckets of experience because we do still have our tank to the left here, which has 18 buckets of experience inside of it. As per usual, we do have no buckets available. That's fine. We can go ahead and quickly craft a few more, pick up 4 buckets of memory essence, which is the same as liquid XP. And that finally brings us back around to the reason that I have encouraged mobs to spawn on the bottom platform, and that is because I need to kill at least 1 spider, but potentially multiple spiders, until we get at least 1 spider eye, at which point we can then actually craft up this cursed chicken feed. And so real quick, let's try and see here if we can't get to a single spider. The way that I've set this up, the spiders actually can't leave here, which is kind of perfect. It means they kind of sit up at the top, and they, crucially, are away from the creepers unlike us, which is good. And again, thanks to the fact that the gold sword here does come with looting by default, that means that we don't have to worry at all about the spider eyes. In fact, we got one from one of the first few spiders that we killed. And the reason I built this out of netherrack and not anything else, we're going to die, that's unfortunate, but the reason that I built that out of netherrack is due to the fact that we actually don't have any cobblestone, and netherrack just happens to be the block that we have the most of. We do have another problem that you just saw that we need to address. That problem is that the range on our flight is not big enough. What I mean by that is over here, we of course have our environmental controller, and a few times between streams, I have noticed my flight giving out on me. I believe the reason for that is that our height Y levels are too tight. Right now, it only works between Y level 59 and 70. I think we should maybe lower the 59 to 55 so that we can potentially fly under our lowest platform. And I think we should increase the Y height here to maybe 75, and then also maybe push the range up to like 35. That is going to increase the power usage on the environmental controller here, but I think it's worth it, and I think currently our 4 alternators over here should be able to keep up, at least for the time being. And so now we just kind of need to get rid of all of these mobs, but it looks like for the most part they've kind of sorted themselves out. That probably happened when we died, so really all we have to do is get rid of all of the netherrack, place down some torches to make sure they don't come back, and we should be pretty much good to go. And then one last thing here real quick actually. Last episode, you may have noticed that we had a couple of storage drawers that were full of nuggets like this. The reason for that is due to a recent pack update, which changed the kind of ingots that work in compacting drawers. And so what I've had to do between streams is craft new compacting drawers, move the ones that we already had. Thankfully, they don't lose their inventory when you pick them up, so you can pick them up and move them. And all I have been doing is making sure these are linked again. So you put them down, link them up, put down a new drawer over here, lock it to whatever you want. And you'll notice here we have zinc, and then the new zinc looks like this. So annoyingly, what I was going to do originally was kind of take out the zinc and then just put it in the new drawer. That doesn't work, unfortunately. But what you can do, if you make sure this drawer is linked, like we've just done, you can then open up your interface, your terminal. You can then go into here, type in zinc, find the old zinc nuggets, quickly craft those into zinc ingots, and then just shift craft all of those. So just shift click and just spam it until you've got all of the zinc ingots made. You can double click, by the way, any stack of zinc ingots, and that will put all of the zinc ingots that you have back into the system. And because when you craft it, you get the new zinc ingot, that then puts it into this drawer here. It's a little bit awkward, but I found this to be the fastest way to make this happen, especially given that we don't actually have any kind of AUTOCRAFTIng just yet. If you had AUTOCRAFTIng up and running, you could maybe make that work, but for now, we can just go and do something like that, and then from there we can kind of unlock this with our configuration tool, make sure it's empty, make sure it doesn't have any utility or storage upgrades in it, and then drop it back into the system. And then back up here, the one benefit to the update is that the steel now does work inside of the compacting drawer, and so I have, between streams, gone ahead and replaced this drawer with a compacting drawer. Either way, back over here, we should now have everything that we need to make our GM chicken feed cursed. And if we quickly head on back over to our platform that has our passive mobs on it, to do that, we are going to have to re-enable our jetpack here. Let me quickly check that we have enough juice in our jetpack. I think this would be enough juice, but again, just to be safe, I will go ahead and quickly charge that up over in here because it charges very fast. And so if we head on back over here, we should be able to find a chicken very quickly and use that to get our cursed egg. All right, here is our chicken. Right click. You do lose the chicken, but that gets us a rotten egg. And so now back at home, we can do the exact same thing we did before. We can put down a 5x5 area of dirt. And then if we right click the rotten egg onto that 5x5 area of dirt, it's going to convert that into dreadful dirt. Now, those mobs are going to start spawning quite rapidly. I do believe that unlike the delightful dirt, if the dreadful dirt sees sunlight, it might burn and turn back to regular dirt, so you do want to put this inside of a dark box. To do that, I think the easiest dark box you can make is obviously with something like cobblestone or dirt, but I think the easiest, best looking dark box you can make is with tinted glass here. This stuff, super easy to make. It's just glass and then either coal or charcoal, and thanks to our glass automation, we do have a bunch of it ready to go. We'll go ahead and make some of that. It's actually charcoal or coal that we don't really have that much of, but of course, if we wanted to, we could go ahead and throw some stuff into the furnace here. We do need to get some of these other drawers, like the drawer for planks, connected up to our AE2 system so that we can access it for stuff like this, but that'll get us more charcoal should we need it. And so real quick, what I am going to do is down on this lower level here, I'm going to build a little platform. I'm going to throw down the 25 dirt. I'm going to put some tinted glass around that to make it dark. And then we'll come back, we'll throw down the rotten egg, and we'll also look at getting into mob killing and harvesting all of the outputs from that mob farm. Okay, so not too long later, and we have a new little platform in the middle of the base here. We'll come back to the netherrack in a second, but over here we have a 5x5 platform with some tinted glass around it ready for our mob farm. I have also gone ahead and made some more tinted glass here so we can go ahead and build this up just as soon as we shift scroll to remove the restrictions on our wand. We don't have to go all the way up to the top, but again, I think it's going to look just a little bit better if we do go all the way up like this. We do have player filters in the pack. These right here, these player filters. They're not too difficult to make, actually, and the benefit of the player filters is that we can walk through them, but mobs cannot. And so if we were to quickly craft up some oak fences, which again would be easier if we did connect this up to our AE2 system. Again, that is still on the list of things to do. For now, though, let's do this and this. We then also need 1 gold pickaxe, and then somewhat annoyingly, we also need 4 stone, which we do not have, and that's kind of becoming a bit of an increasing problem here. We are fully out of cobblestone, and we also don't have any regular stone, and so I am going to take a little bit of a detour here and see if we can't get 2 igneous extruders. The igneous extruders here are going to allow us to produce both stone and cobblestone automatically and fairly easily in a very compact space. To make this, we are missing some redstone servos, and I do want 2 of these, 1 for cobblestone and 1 for regular stone. We then need 8 invar, some glass, 2 pistons, and then 2 Constantan gears. Constantan, as we saw previously, is an alloy that we can make inside of our alloy kiln, or now we could actually make it inside of our induction smelter with nickel and copper, both of which we have. And so real quick, if we throw those in over here, boom, boom, we should be able to time in a bottle this to make it just that little bit faster. And as soon as we have 8 of the Constantan, we'll have enough to make the 2 gears. And that should be basically everything that we're going to need to make 2 igneous extruders. 1 and 2. Nice. So the way these work is we place them down in the world, and we can place lava and water either side of them to begin producing products. For example, if we want to produce cobblestone, I believe it is as simple as just putting it down, and this is obviously just for demonstration purposes here, but I'm fairly certain that if we were to, again, grab a bucket, we should be able to put water on the one side and lava on the other. This, I believe, should just start making cobblestone. It does. Nice. If we wanted it to produce regular stone, that's where we would have to put a modifier block underneath the igneous extruder. In this case, a magma block would do the trick. Thankfully, we do get magma blocks at the start of this pack if you're playing on the Skyblock mode, and so in our case, it would just be a case of replacing this block right here with a magma block, and this will now start making regular stone as opposed to cobblestone. Nice. And just like other machines from thermal expansion, you can make these faster by using integral components. Right now, we actually don't have any integral components, although I do believe that it shouldn't be that difficult for us to make this first tier, especially now that we have access to these electronic components. It's just glass, redstone, invar, and the aforementioned electronic component. I'll take 2 here, and if we put this in, it's going to start making stone faster. We could then also look at upgrading. To upgrade, we would have to use one of our finished PCBs. We'd also need some signalum gears as well. And so for now, we'll hold off. I think this is going to be fast enough, especially if we go ahead and move this downstairs and set it up in a more permanent fashion so that we just have all of the stone and cobblestone being produced, pumped into a drawer, and then if we connect that drawer up to our drawer controller, much like we've done with all of our other resources, at that point we should just have a continuous supply of both cobblestone and stone, which we can pull from whenever we need to craft or whenever we need to do some more base building. Alright, so I've put these down here on the bottom level, right next to our sand production, and also next to our new nether quartz production, which is doing phenomenally well, as is the Certus Quartz that we set up in the last episode as well. We're up at 2048. We've completely filled this drawer with Certus Quartz. Over here, we've got 2 lava source blocks, 2 water source blocks. One of these has the magma block beneath it. Both of these drawers have puller upgrades to pull from the igneous extruder below. And if we go ahead and throw in both of the integral components, these are now going to go a fair bit faster. You can only put 1 integral component in to any given machine. Sometimes it will let you put a integral component of a different tier in as well as the first tier, but at that point you'll only get the higher tier benefit. You won't get any benefit from the lower tier component, so it's worth taking that out and using it elsewhere. So this is working, which is good, and over time I think we're going to end up backing up both of those drawers with stone and cobblestone. And so now back over here we can continue with what we were doing before. That was setting up some of these player filters. So for the player filters, we were just missing stone, and the big benefit of these is that you can put them down like this, and then the player can walk through them like this, but mobs cannot. Now, the chat was a little concerned that the player filters might let light pass through them, and it looks like that kind of is the case. What we could do is we could potentially, in that case, put the player filter at the top like this. I think that's still dark enough in there to where we're not going to have a problem with the cursed earth, but it does still allow us to fly in and do kind of any maintenance that we want to do. So we could go in now and put down the rotten egg, but if we did that, we would end up with a lot of mobs and no way to kill them. That is where the rest of the mob grinding utilities mod comes into play. That's the same mod that adds the tinted glass here. This mod also adds the mob masher. This is a very powerful mob killing tool. To make it, we need a block of redstone, easy enough, and then a lot of iron swords. We need 2 iron swords for the base recipe, and then we need 2 iron spikes. Each one of the iron spikes requires 6 iron swords, and so let's quickly do a bunch of iron sword crafting, assuming we have the inventory space in those chests, which it looks like, thankfully, we do. On top of that, we need a few blocks of iron. Of course, we don't have to craft those because we have the compacting drawers doing that for us. And boom, there is our mob masher. This thing is really straightforward. Essentially, all you have to do is put it down and give it a redstone signal. And as long as it has a redstone signal, it will begin to spin, and then anything that touches it will take damage. You can make it deal more damage by adding in sharpness upgrades. You can also improve the number of drops you get by giving it looting upgrades as well. And this is where the mob masher gets crazy powerful, because if you put in the maximum number of looting upgrades, which is 10, along with the maximum number of sharpness upgrades as well, which is also 10, you get a mob masher that kills almost every mob instantaneously and gives you a ton of mob drops for every single mob that you kill. And so it's going to be definitely worth us making both of these. For that, we are going to need some more lapis to get more blue dye. And then for the sharpness upgrades, we're going to need even more swords here because it's 4 iron swords per sharpness upgrade. And that kind of leads me onto a side tangent here, because we could actually use Applied Energistics 2 AUTOCRAFTING to make this just that little bit easier on us. And so that brings me to this netherrack here. My plan is going to be to make a bunch of controllers from Applied Energistics and connect them into one big multi-block controller. To do that, we're going to need some more skystone and some more fluix crystals. The fluix crystals are now thankfully very easy for us because we just need nether quartz, which we're making automatically, redstone, which we can buy, and charged Certus quartz, which we don't have a ton of, but we do of course have a ton of Certus quartz now, and as we saw before, we can very rapidly charge that over here, especially now that we have more power being generated. And so getting a large amount of fluix, not going to be a problem. Getting a large amount of skystone, also not going to be an issue. We can buy that and smelt it very quickly using our time in a bottle here. And the reason that we want a large multi-block ME controller is because by default in this pack, Applied Energistics does have the channels system enabled. For those of you who are not familiar with the AE2 channel system, essentially each side of the ME controller has a certain number of channels associated to it. The default number is 32 for a dense cable. This one right here, the dense smart cable, this can access all 32 channels. The default Fluix cable that we're using here can only access 8 channels per face of the controller. Essentially what that means is that we can only have 8 devices connected to each side of the ME controller if we're using this standard Fluix glass. When I say devices, I mean anything that connects to the system. So each one of these ME storage buses, that counts as one device. The security terminal here, I believe, also counts as one device. The wireless access point there definitely counts as one, and the ME crafting terminal also counts as one. And so you can see already, we're kind of getting close to the 8 max limit. If you want to see the number of channels being used, that is where smart cable comes into play. If you make Fluix ME smart cable, this is kind of just standard smart cable, this still can only carry 8 channels, but it comes with the added benefit of showing you how many channels are being used. For example, if I were to go ahead and break this, can I put this here and this here? I totally can. Nice. And you'll see at the bottom there that it says 6 of 8 channels, or you'll see at the top it says 6 of 8 channels. It does also kind of show you on the cable itself how many are being used, but at the top, 6 of 8 channels being used, and that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And so if we were to try and connect 3 more things together, this would just stop working, which is not ideal. We could then go ahead and replace this cable with dense cable. Dense cable would give us access to 32 channels, again, per phase, so it's not total for the controller. If we were to put a smart cable down on the bottom here, we would see a very different number because, again, we've got like 1 item here, and then I don't think these are counted as connected because they only have power going through. They don't have the channels going through. That's the whole reason we put the quartz fiber down. But essentially, what you can do is you can go ahead and put down multiple AE2 controllers next to each other, and each side of each controller, or should I say each face of each controller, has 32 channels. And so if you put down a large multi-block structure of controllers, you can give yourself a massive number of AE2 channels to the point where you don't really have to worry about it. And so real quick, let me go and throw another stack of Certus quartz on here, just so it's ready when we need it again. Let's also go ahead and grab a stack of redstone to go with our stack of quartz and stack of charged Certus quartz. And if we just drop all 3 of these stacks into this water here, we should get more than enough Fluix crystals to go ahead and make quite a few ME controllers. I don't know if we're going to make the full multi-block just yet, simply due to the fact that it does also appear that the controller itself has kind of a passive drain on power. In here, we can see that the controller itself is using 3 AE per tick. In the top left, you can change the power units to RF, and right now that means it's using 6 RF per tick. And so if we were to put a ton of them down, we'd just be using power for no reason. But just to kind of show off the proof of concept here, I'm going to grab the Skystone. I'm also going to grab some more coal out of here. We did kind of switch over when we were making the tinted glass. Instead of just smelting more logs, we did just go ahead, buy some more coal ore and process that in the squeezer. But now we can do something like this, and we can go ahead and make a couple of ME controllers. I'm not going to make a ton, again, also because of the fact that I don't want to use all of my engineering processes. But essentially, down here, we're going to go ahead and put down a bunch of controllers, like this. And these will all connect together and form one multi-block controller that we can then use and access all of the sides of all of the controllers to provide our system with channels. And the reason I'm building it here, again, is just because it's nice and central, and that kind of means that we can also move our wireless access point down and around to that multi-block controller as well. That does mean we're going to get rid of this controller, and it means we're going to have to run cable up over to this area of the base to keep all of this online. Okay, so it's a work in progress, but over here, we now have kind of a tall controller, because my plan here is to build a cuboidal ME controller that's going to take up all of the space where the netherrack currently is. For now, I've chosen just to go tall like this so that we can put the cable at the top, and we can also connect the power up as well, run that along, and you'll see here that thankfully for now we're only using 7 of 8 channels, and that means that over here all of our stuff is online. That's because, as we saw before, there's only 6 items up here, and then there's actually only 1 item below. That's this right here, because again, these don't count. So for now that's fine, and again, we can now go ahead and move our wireless access point with all of its associated boosters round to the lower level. And if we put it down nice and central, which again is another reason why I built this nice and central, if we were to put it, let's say, right about here, like this, we can again put in our wireless boosters. That's going to keep us at 7 because we've taken 1 and then re-added it. And now we should be able to access within a much nicer range. It's still the same range, but it should be much more usable. As in, over here, we can still use it. And I think, basically, in the center of all of our platforms, we should still be able to use it as well. We can. Over here, slight issue in that our Duraplast drawer here is full. I'm going to postpone fixing that for a second by just putting the metal press mold in the system, because we have other bigger fish to fry, but we will come back to fixing that problem sooner rather than later. For now, though, what I actually want to do is I want to look at some AE2 AUTOCRAFTing. For that, we are going to need more channels. And so what I'm actually going to do here, somewhat awkwardly, Again, all of this is somewhat temporary. We can make it look nicer once we have more channels available to us. I think for now we could potentially do something like this and like this. That does kind of waste this side, but for now we're not using all the sides, so we do have space to waste, and there's no limit on the verticality of the wireless booster here. Unlike our environmental controller, we can use this at any Y level, and so it doesn't really matter where you put it. From a Y level perspective, it only matters in terms of an X and Z axis perspective. And so this should still give us the same access, but free up some channels further up here. So in terms of auto-crafting with AE2, one of the first things that we're going to need is another terminal. Specifically, we need the pattern encoding terminal, this guy right here. To make it, as you may have guessed if you watched the last episode, we need yet more of these ME crafting terminals. For that, we are just missing one more ME terminal, which as per usual is missing a formation core. That's fine. And then it looks like we also need to get one more of these illuminator panels. Again, that really should not be too difficult. The quartz glass was super easy for us to make before. It's still super easy for us to make now. And that should be everything for another one of these illuminator panels. And then that should be everything we need to make the normal terminal, which is then everything for the crafting terminal, which is everything for the pattern terminal. Nice. We're going to go ahead and throw that down right about here. That's going to take up yet another channel space. And in here, we can use AE2 patterns, that being these ones, to encode recipes. Again, thankfully, these are super easy for us to make. We'll make a bunch of those and stick them in here. And now we can begin to teach our system how to craft. For example, if we wanted to teach our system how to craft these mob masher upgrades for sharpness, we would click on this, we can click the little fill recipe, and then we can click encode. And now we have a pattern that knows how to do this recipe. In order to actually allow our system to craft that recipe though, we need a couple of things. We need a molecular assembler. This is the guy that actually does the crafting work. Again, you can't actually craft in the pattern encoding terminal. You need to go back into the regular terminal to make that happen. Make some more annihilation cores, which we can do as soon as we get some more Fluix dust. Once we have the dust, we can make the annihilation cores. I'll make a few of those just in case, and then that should be everything for the molecular assembler. And then finally, we also need a pattern provider, that being this guy right here. Again, more of the same stuff here. We need crafting tables. We also need formation cores, which are now out of logic processors. Between streams, I did get a few more logic processors cooking just for such an eventuality, and boom. So the idea here, and again, for a proof of concept, I'm going to put this over near the controller, but we'll probably end up moving these to one of the other platforms fairly soon. But the idea here is that you can connect up the pattern provider and the molecular assembler to the controller. And if we do, let's say this and this, the molecular assembler can get power through the pattern provider. I don't think this takes up 2 channels. I think this takes up 1 channel despite being 2 devices. And I'm also fairly certain that you can wrench to point this in the direction of the molecular assembler. I'm not entirely certain if that is necessary, but what we can now do is we can put our pattern into the pattern provider, and the molecular assembler here kind of acts just as an auto crafter. And so now, if we look in our system and we type in sharpness, we can see that we have the option to craft the mob mashing upgrade for sharpness. If we click on it, we can specify how many we want our system to craft. And then if we click next, after we've specified the amount, it will tell us if we have the required items to make that craft happen. Right now, we're just missing iron swords. There are 2 things we could do in that scenario. We could either go and make some iron swords, put them in the system, and then request the craft again. Alternatively, we could go ahead and teach our system how to make iron swords, and then whack that into the same pattern provider to teach our system how to make iron swords. You can put up to 9 patterns into 1 pattern provider, and then you can put up to 6 pattern providers around 1 molecular assembler. For now, we have a molecular assembler and a pattern provider that is capable of making the sharpness upgrade and making the iron sword, but we still can't hit start. The reason for that is that we do not have a crafting CPU. In order to get a crafting CPU, we need one of these guys, a crafting unit. This is made with some calculation processors, a logic processor, some iron, and some Fluix cable. And then from there, we can upgrade this into any of these crafting storages here. We have the 1K, the 4K, the 16K, 64K, and 256K. For now, I'd say we'd start with 1K, but I think we actually have what it takes to go ahead and make a 4K storage component, just like we did in the last episode, and then go ahead and make a 4K crafting storage, which I think should just be as simple as doing this. It is. Now, this alone does actually count as a CPU. And if we go ahead and put this down somewhere, right now we do have 7 or 8 channels here, so we can go and do something like this. That's going to take up our 8th channel, but now we have a CPU. And if we once again go and try to request a sharpness upgrade, we can see that we now have the option to start that craft. For those wondering, the size of the crafting storage just determines how big of a craft you can do. If we go ahead and request 1 sharpness upgrade, you'll see at the top here, this requires 75 bytes. Our crafting storage here can do crafts up to 4,000 bytes, and so we have more than enough space. However, if we wanted to request, 5,000 of these upgrades, that would require 135,000 bytes, and that's where we would need a much bigger crafting storage to make that happen. For now though, if we were to go ahead and request the 9 of these that we need to finish the craft, I think we're going to find that we're missing other items. Surprisingly, we're not. We can just go ahead and hit start, and if we look down here, we should see this molecular assembler begin to do these crafts. Okay, so it turns out that earlier when I made this point at the molecular assembler, you'll see the molecular assembler is not actually lighting up, and that means it's not getting power. So what we need to do here is we need to go ahead and kind of disengage this. I think the quickest and easiest way is just to break it and replace it like that. You'll see now it's got this kind of RGB, which means it is online. If I put these back in, we should see this working, and it totally is. And again, you can put acceleration cards in here to make this faster, but you'll see that it's making iron swords. It's going to do that over and over until it has enough iron swords to make our 9 sharpness upgrades, at which point it will start making those sharpness upgrades and putting them back into the system. Nice. That probably wasn't easier than doing it ourselves, but on a big enough scale with a lot of the stuff that we do want to autocraft going forward, having that capability in place is going to be very useful for us. For now, in terms of getting our mob masher online, all we need to do is grab some more lapis ore, whack that in here, and then impatiently hit it with our time in a bottle. This does have over 11 hours now though, so I'm not really too worried about using up any of that time. And then from there, we should be able to craft up at least a few more of these looting upgrades. And as soon as we get 1 more lapis, we can get that final piece of blue dye, which should be everything for our 10th looting upgrade. And now we can actually get this show on the road. In the time it's taken me to do that, we have managed to get quite a few hostile mobs in here that are not actually from the Dreadful Dirt, but thankfully we do have a solution for those mobs. What we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and place down our mob masher. Let's say in this corner right here. We're probably going to see some mobs fall through here, but that's fine. Then we need to get the mob masher itself onto this block of dirt where that skeleton is standing. So real quick, if you could just move out of my way, guys, that would be fantastic. There we go. Now that's down, we need to actively push the mobs towards that mob masher to make sure that they get killed. We can also go ahead and put our sharpness and looting upgrades. You'll notice that skeleton touched the mob masher but didn't die. That's because we don't have enough upgrades in. If we can get him to kind of come over again, we should see him die instantly the next time he touches the mob masher because of the fact that we have those sharpness and looting upgrades in. Again, though, we kind of do need to force them to touch it, and to do that, that is where our good old friends, the vector plates, come into play. These are pretty easy to make, especially given that we can buy the oil clumps instead of making more slime balls. We just need some deep slate in order to make this happen, but I believe we can probably get that from the nether. So you can actually use either basalt or blackstone, both of which are in pretty large abundance here in the nether, especially if you come to the basalt deltas biome. And yeah, I think that should be probably more than enough. I'll get a bit more just in case, but and also our paxel is about to break. We'll get a bit more blackstone here until the paxel breaks. But I think that is all we're going to need. There are a couple of ways you can do this as well. You can also use mob fans from mob grinding utilities, but I find the vex plates work quite well. And a benefit of the vector plates here, and we are only going to need 24, of course, because we have our mob masher in the 25th slot, is that you can upgrade these to fast vector plates. And then if you really want, you can even upgrade these to these extreme vector plates. The benefit of these is that you don't really give the mobs any time to do anything before they are flung full speed into the mob masher. And when I'm talking about giving them time to do stuff, I mean stuff like this, where they ascend to the heights of the platform, because that is not what we want. Instead, what we would prefer is that all of the mobs die, which most of them have, and then we would prefer after that we don't die, which is what's going to happen if you go into that mob masher, especially when it has the sharpness upgrades. That does go to show the power of those sharpness upgrades, because they kill us even with a full set of netherite armor, which is not ideal. Thankfully, it does also get rid of all of the other mobs. And so real quick, if you hold shift, you will not get flung by the vector plates. We can get rid of the snow. Fantastic. We're then going to go ahead and do two things here. We want to have our rotten egg ready, and then we want to make sure that we put down all of the vector plates, and we want to make sure that they're all facing towards the mob masher. I don't know if you can quite see here, it is a bit dark, but they are pointing in this direction. They will point in the way that you are currently facing. So we're going to put all of these down. I'm going to leave the middle one missing for the time being, and that's because that middle one there is where we are going to put, and this is very precarious, because if we have to let go of shift to fly, but if we let go of shift and we're on any of these vector plates, we will get flung directly into that mob masher. There we go, we got it. But now we want to right click here, boom, place down the vector plate immediately, like that, because mobs are going to start spawning very quickly, and then get out of here. And you'll see that right away, all of those mobs start to spawn. They all get flung before they can even blink into the mob masher, and they get killed immediately. And so now, what we need to do is we need to get some kind of item collector. There is an item called the item collector, which is pretty useful, but I think for our situation here, the absorption hopper is actually maybe the better choice, because the absorption hopper here can also absorb XP. To make this happen though, we do need to get some blaze powder, which we currently do not have, and so I think we are going to have to head back through to the nether to make that happen. Chat is pointing out that if we're going to go and get blazes from the nether, I'll go fight blazes from the nether, we could also look at bringing a blaze spawner back and adding it to our pre-existing mob farm so that we don't have to keep going back to get them over and over again. Now, the easiest way, I believe, for us to do that is going to be with a cardboard box. The cardboard box is, thankfully, pretty easy to make. If we take 4 oak logs, we can then pulverize those in our pulverizer. Give that a quick tap to make it just that little bit faster, and actually it looks like only 1 log was needed there because you get quite a bit of sawdust per log, but the cardboard box is super nifty in that you can right click it on a block, you can then break the cardboard box, place it down elsewhere, and it will move the block without changing the block's state in any way. This is actually particularly useful for chests. So over here, for example, we have these chests. If I wanted to pick up these without emptying them out first, I could put the cardboard box on... Oh no, I can't put it on there because it's too big. But if it was a normal chest like this, I could put the cardboard box on, pick it up, move it, put it down, take it off, and it would still have all of its items in, which is quite useful for almost all chests, but not ones that are far too big like these right here. Either way, what we're going to do is we're going to head back into... We're going to head back into the nether, and we're going to try and find a blaze spawner. And if we put the cardboard box over the blaze spawner, we can then go ahead and pick that blaze spawner up and bring it back in the exact same intact condition. Okay, so an easy way to find a blaze spawner is to do this. Oops, there we go. We are going to have to get rid of these guys real quick. That is fine. I did go ahead and make a new pixel. This time, because it's only 1 netherite, I did also go ahead and just upgrade it to a netherite pixel. Easy enough. But here, if you find one of these obsidian pillars that has a blaze lantern in it, that is almost certainly going to have a blaze spawner in it. And then from there, you can just go ahead and pick that up. I am going to break this obsidian first, just so that I guarantee that I get that cardboard box. What I don't want to do is kind of break the cardboard box and have it pop out in a weird way and land in the lava. That would be not ideal. And so let's do this and this. Cool. There's also some more stuff in here, none of which I think we really need. The bombs are kind of cool. You can throw these. The transistor, I guess, could be useful. And then, other than that, I don't think there's much that we necessarily want. The bombs here, you just kind of right-click to throw, and they blow up. Like that. Either way, now that we have our cardboard box with the blaze spawner in it, we should be able to just go ahead and place this down inside of our mob farm. Again, this is one of those situations where it comes in useful to have this player filter here, because now we can just go ahead and do something like this. First of all, turn off the jetpack, and then we'll go maybe 1, 2, put this down, get rid of this, 1, 2, shift right click to take the cardboard off the cardboard box, and we should see some, hopefully, blazes spawning in here. The blazes should naturally just kind of descend down to the vector plates, and then they should end up being sent around and over towards the mob masher. Chat is right that we could go ahead and put like a vector plate down here, just so that if a mob does spawn on top like that, they kind of get shifted off to the side. Of course, we do actually have to go and get the blaze rods that are produced here, and so we might have to try and kind of sneak in at the side. We're also going to get a ton of other stuff that for now, we're going to have to try and put just into our system, which is already not doing too great on space, and we have to do all of that whilst ideally avoiding getting killed by the mob masher, which is pretty sensitive and very strong. If we stay kind of as far onto this side as possible, I think we should be fine, and we can do something like this. I did see one of the blaze rods getting put into there. I also saw one of the mobs getting yeeted out into the abyss there, which is not ideal for our mob drops, but for now, we should be able to quickly patch this up, and I think that we should have everything we need. Do we have a blaze rod? We do. We've got 26 of them. We can craft up some blaze powder. We can then use that blaze powder to craft up an Eye of Ender, and we can use that Eye of Ender, of course, to make an absorption hopper. That absorption hopper can go down really anywhere near this mob farm. We'll go ahead and put it right about here, and that is going to start to collect all of the items from the mobs that we are killing, and now we need to actually store all of these mob drops in a somewhat reasonable location. And this is actually one of those situations where the sophisticated chests that we have up here could actually come in quite useful. And so what I might end up doing here is kind of emptying these chests out into an ME drive. The ME drive should be fairly easy to make. It is. And again, for now, this is going to take up a channel, so we're going to go ahead and put it down over here where we have channels free. So I'm going to put it right here for the time being. That's going to take all of the channels from this side, but again, fine for the time being. We'll move it eventually. And in here, we can place our drives. We do need to get enough drives to store all of our items, and then we could potentially take one of these netherite chests and use it to store our mob drops. The benefit of that is that, again, we can store a ton of items in each stack, and we can also put void upgrades in like we've done over here to delete any excess mob drops once we've got to a certain amount, once we've filled a full stack. So in terms of filling up our disk drives, we need to make disks. And there are a couple of disks you can make. The AE2 Things mod adds in these deep item storage disks, storage for dummies disks. These disk drives work in the exact same way as the disk drives from refined storage. And that just makes them a lot more easy to understand and a lot less difficult to explain. Essentially, a 1K ME disk drive can hold 1,000 items, a 4K ME disk drive can hold 4,000 items, 16K 16,000, 64,000, and 256,000. Pretty straightforward stuff. To make it, we need these storage components, which again are mostly made with logic processors. Speaking of which, it's probably going to be in our best interest to get even more logic processors cooking down here. So let me get the gold press and the gold ingots in there. We also might be able to make some acceleration cards as well real quick here. For that, we need to get some advanced cards, which are just calculation processors with diamonds, redstone, and iron. And if we then upgrade those with some fluix crystals, we can make acceleration cards. We can put those in. I believe this inscriber can take 5 of them. It can, and that makes this much, much faster at making these printed logic circuits. We're also going to need a bunch of silicon as well, which again, for now, we're getting by smelting nether quartz. So let's do that and this. Fantastic. And while we wait for that to happen, let's see if these disks are actually attainable. They do require amethyst shards, which we currently don't have. However, we do have these budding amethysts here, which we can place down. And in a similar fashion to our Certus quartz here, we could even look to using another annihilation plane to automatically harvest the amethyst as well that is kind of spawned on here. So let me put it down. Ideally, let's put it there for now. And I think it's possible we might be able to time and bottle this to make it actually grow faster, although that didn't work with the Certus quartz, and so it's probably not going to work on here either. It doesn't, unfortunately. We'll leave that going for a second, though. That should get us some amethyst sooner rather than later. While we wait for that, we can look at upgrading our storage components to the higher tiers, because no matter which one we pick, we only need 1 amethyst. And so down here, let's do silicon in here with our silicon. Perfect. And then we can, of course, combine those up with our integrated circuits to make some more logic chips. Thankfully, we've got a ton of integrated circuits still, and of course, we can make more of those very easily if we want. And upgrading this to our higher tier should really just be a case of getting more of these logic processors, because as we've seen before, we can craft 3 1Ks into 1 4K, and then if we have enough to make the 3 4Ks, we can then go ahead and craft those 3 4Ks up into 1 16K. And then if we get 3 16Ks, we can upgrade that into 1 64K, and then you get the idea. We can also upgrade 3 64Ks into 1 256K. And I think that might not be a terrible idea. If we have enough processors to make that happen, that's probably what we should do. Okay, so not too long later, we have managed to make 1 64K disk here, and we basically have everything else we're going to need. We can very quickly craft up the netherite ingots here. The only thing we don't have, of course, is the amethyst. However, it turns out the crystal growth accelerators do in fact work on the budding amethyst as well. And so we can, in fact, use the exact same setup here with another annihilation plane to automate the production of these amethyst shards. We have two options here. We could put down another storage drawer and then use another storage bus. Alternatively, though, if we wanted to, we could also just go ahead and replace this drawer with another one of the 2x1 drawers, these guys right here, and that would allow this drawer to store both the amethyst shards and the Certus quartz, again, assuming that we set this up correctly, where we do this, and then make sure, of course, that that is locked so that nothing else can make its way in there, and that should just work. Although it looks like, for whatever reason, that is breaking the amethyst before it actually turns into a crystal, which is not ideal. We might have to change the way this works, because that is not producing amethyst for us, nor is it actually working as intended. And then that does mean here, by the way, that this will store less. We won't be able to put the full 2048 in here, but one thing you can do is you can actually make upgrades for the storage drawers to allow them to store more stuff. The lowest tier storage upgrade is copper. This increases the storage space by a multiple of 8. From there, you can upgrade to gold, diamond, or netherite. And you do need the previous tier to upgrade, so we would have to start with the copper upgrade and move from there. But even just putting a copper upgrade in here multiplies the block item storage by 8, which is going to take it, I believe, to about 8,000, which should mean that it can hold all of the Certus quartz crystals that we had in the previous drawer, and then more on top of that as well, which is ideal. And as you can see in here, it does actually tell us 8,200 is the amount it can store, at which point we can go ahead and just kind of unlock this, make sure it's empty, and throw it back into our system for future use. Annoyingly, this, as I mentioned, doesn't seem like it's working, so we are going to have to tweak that. For now, though, we do only need the one amethyst shard, and so back up here, we should be able to make our first 64K ME storage disk. Fantastic. And if we go and whack that into our ME drive, we should now be able to start storing items inside of that drive. So if we were to go ahead and kind of just dump the stuff that we have here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to disconnect actually all 3 of these, and we can do that with the hammer to make it a bit cleaner, like that. But we can now get rid of these, which is going to give us more channels back. And now if we dump our stuff into the system, we should see all of that stuff going into our disk drive over here. And we can, look at that, it's got 394 out of 64,000 bytes used, and so I'm hopeful, maybe a bit optimistically so, but I'm hopeful that we can kind of fit all of the stuff that we have in all of these chests into that disk. Over here, we can go and change the priority on this storage bus, which is definitely something we should do in the top right here. I'm going to set this to priority 1000. That means that if we put in an item that can go into one of these drawers, it will try and do that first. Of course, that's probably unlikely because all of these drawers are full. But for example, if we had some soul sand and we tried to put it in, it would put the soul sand in this drawer before it put it in the system. Same is true with the cobblestone or really any other storage drawer, which is ideal. And so real quick, I'm going to go ahead and see if we can't empty this out. Okay, so it looks like we did have more than enough space because I've emptied everything in all of our chests out, and we are not even close. 12,232 out of 64,000, so we have got a ton of space in this ME drive. Over here, I've gone ahead and thrown down this chest. I will go and get one of those stack upgrades and throw that in there. Just one will do the trick. We don't need all 3 of them. And then in the absorption hopper, we can set the down here to items, and that's going to start pumping all of those items down into the chest. And then just like before, I think we can go ahead and grab a void upgrade here to hopefully allow us to delete any excess items that are produced. Voids items selected in the filter is what it says. Voids items selected in the filter has more filtering options. So if I put this in, then in terms of the filtering settings here, only works with upgrade / automation, void any, allow. So if I say to deny, it should void everything that's not on the block list. And then void any, I assume, means void everything. Allows a single slot to be filled. Oh, I see. Void any might have just destroyed everything that was coming in. Allows a single slot to be filled with the item and voids anything that overflows. I think this is what we want. And I think that's fine. So now I think it's going to go ahead and pump items into here continuously from the absorption hopper. And then once we fill up a single stack of any of these items, any excess items are then going to be deleted. Void any is not what we want. So void overflow is good. Cool. And so now that we have this up and running, we can go ahead, for example, and take our ender pearls here, pulverize those down, and make even more of those range add-ons. It might not be strictly necessary because at this point in time, I think we can go quite far out and still access our system. But as you can see, we can't go all the way out, and so it might be worth getting a couple more range add-ons, especially as we go to make our base bigger. It's probably going to be helpful to have those lying around. And so real quick, let's go grab that ender pearl dust from here as soon as we make this just a tiny bit faster. I did accidentally put my time in a bottle away whilst we were dumping stuff in the system. Let's do something like that to make that a decent amount faster. We do have to bear in mind the power consumption, of course, of the range boosters, but I think that we should be able to put a few more of these in here without worrying too much about the power cost. Right now, our system is using 86 RF per tick. That's kind of fine though. And over here, if we do this, that's going to take our range up to 47.6 meters. It does increase the cost there marginally, and we are now using almost 100 redstone flux per tick. One last thing that we do need to get going on, because I did say we were going to do it at the start of the episode, is I would like to replace this system here with AE2, so we can automate the production of our compressed mechanisms without having to rely on the system we were using previously. The system before kind of worked, but it ran into some awkward issues when we either didn't have lava or we had too much lava, and we constantly ended up with this pressure chamber being full of items, which was not ideal. The benefit to using AE2 for this is that AE2 won't just keep sending items until the system starts to lag and crash. It will send items, and if it doesn't receive the output, it just won't send another craft. And so the way this works is kind of the same way as the molecular assembler downstairs. We take a pattern provider. We're then going to point that pattern provider at one of these pressure chamber interfaces. You could put it on a chest first and then at the pressure chamber interface, but I think for the most part, this should work. You do here want to make sure that this does point at the pressure chamber interface like this. And then from there, we just need some Fluix cable, and we need to connect this up to our pre-existing line of Fluix cable, which is potentially going to be easier said than done, given that we have some logic cable down here. That is fine. We can probably reroute the logic cable ever so slightly. And so if I do this, 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 and this, all we're then going to do is over in our pattern encoding terminal, we are going to encode a pattern for the compressed mechanism, that being this guy here. So if we were to go and fill this recipe, what we've done here by shift-clicking that in is we've swapped from crafting patterns to processing patterns. And now we can hit encode, and we have a pattern that knows that if it sends 4 basic mechanisms with 1 compressed iron gear, 1 inval rod, and 1 lava bucket to this pattern provider, this one over here, because that's where we're going to put this pattern, it will get back 4 compressed mechanisms and a lava bucket, which is perfect. What we want to do from there is potentially get rid of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the cellar for now. And I guess we can also probably disconnect this here for now as well. I don't think that's going to be necessary. What we are going to do, though, is we're going to take some item pipes, and we're going to pipe the final product back around into the pattern provider. What that's going to do is that's going to put the items back into our system. So instead of just being in this drawer here, the items are going to go back into the system, and that's going to allow the AE2 system to see that the craft has been successfully completed, which is exactly what we want. So if we set this to extract like that, real quick, I am going to empty out what's in here just so we can get a good idea of what is and isn't working. Again, you can see there's a bunch of stuff in there that shouldn't be there on its own. But either way, now, if we were to go to request this, just as soon as we connect it up, we should just be able to request that these be produced, and they should get produced. This is going to be fine. Let's run it kind of over like this and along like this. And let's not forget that we do also need to reroute that logic cable. I think we do have a little bit more logic cable in the system. We totally do. And so let's do something like this, 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 and this to keep whatever that is online for the time being until it's no longer necessary. But now in here, let's see. If I type in compressed mechanism, we have 94. Let's take those out. If I wanted to craft 10 and hit next, it says we're missing lava buckets. That is understandable, because the lava buckets here are not currently accessible by the system. And so another thing that we're probably going to want to do to allow our Applied Energistics 2 system to access items like the lava bucket is we're probably going to want to take another storage drawer controller like this, put it down over on this platform, connect it with another storage bus, and then hook up all of these drawers to that storage bus to give our AE2 system access to the stuff that's in here. For now, I'm going to put these in manually. I'll request, let's say 3, hit start, and we should see those items getting sent over. We do. We should then see them getting produced, and they should get sent back round into the system. They do. Nice. On top of that, one thing that we might look at getting in the next episode is a requester. This guy here is not so easy to make. It's going to be a little bit of a craft here, but it's not too bad. And the requester here allows us to automatically keep items and fluids in stock by requesting new crafts when needed. And so essentially we can put one of those down, tell it to always keep, let's say, a stack of these at all times, and then it will automatically request that these get crafted again and again and again until we have 64 of them, and that will just keep the whole thing going. And we can then do that with other things like our capacitors, like our transistors, and like our circuits as well. In fact, real quick, I'm going to go ahead and do the exact same thing we've just done here with our pattern encoder. I'm going to do that over here with the transistor, with the capacitor, and with the unassembled PCB so that our system knows how to make all three of those. And because we just took away a couple of those external storages, I'm hopeful that we have enough channels. We don't. We've only got 2 left there, and we're going to need 3. And so what I probably will end up doing here is maybe moving this power to this side of the controller and then running another smart cable from this face off over to this side so that we have 8 more channels that we can connect. Okay, so a few more pattern providers later, we now have 1 of these on each of our 3 pressure chambers. And I've also put down a 4th one here on this chest to allow us to automate the production of the actual unassembled PCB. So over here, we have a pattern for the transistor. Over here, we have a pattern for the capacitor. And over here, we have a pattern for the empty PCB. And then in here, we have a pattern for that unassembled PCB. And then finally, the last pattern that we would need to kind of complete this setup is we would need a pattern that just crafts the unassembled PCB with the electronic components. That is a regular crafting pattern, not a processing pattern. And that just goes into our pattern provider next to the molecular assembler. So this guy right here, like that. And so now we should be able to just go ahead and kind of request the PCBs. Let's take out the stuff that we have. Let me check for transistors and capacitors as well, because I do want to make sure that this is kind of like a stress test here. Even mechanism-wise, I will put the mechanisms in because we know the mechanisms work and we might be out of lava buckets. Those do need connecting up. But here, if I were to go ahead and request the PCB, if I say I wanted 1 finished PCB and I click start, we should see everything kind of kick into gear, and we should see stuff getting made. Inside of the terminal here, you can click on the little crafting status, and it will show you what's being crafted. So currently, it's the empty PCBs that are being crafted over in here. It looks like we have the things required to make it. I don't know if I put the full speed upgrades onto this to allow it to kind of insert very quickly. It looks like we didn't. It's inserting very slowly. It looks like it does have speed upgrades on the output here. Nope, still not on the output either. Either way, that is working. As you'll see, that worked. Over here, we can see the laser is in action because it's sent around the empty PCB to get turned into an unassembled PCB, and it's going to hold the other empty PCBs and just leave those in the system because it's not needed. We only asked it to make 1 unassembled PCB. This does show a flaw in my plan. We do need to do something like this. We need to disconnect here and set that to extract so that it can send the unassembled PCB background into the system. Also, by the way, this does work. We are extracting from here into this pattern provider. You don't have to extract background into the pattern provider that you originally used. Pumping into any pattern provider works as a return inventory. You'll see all of these. You can put anything in here and it will just send it background into your system. And it totally worked. Look at that. The crafting job is done and we have 1 PCB. And again, as I mentioned earlier, next time we can come back, we can look at putting the requester down and saying, hey, we want you to make 64 PCBs and have them in the system at all times, at which point you will just go ahead and continually make those. We do have a bunch of stuff still to automate. For example, right now, we've not automated the electronic components. That needs doing. We've also not automated things like the arc furnace with the back plates. We have automated this over here, but this needs to be updated so it doesn't overflow like it's currently overflowing. And there's still a bunch of other kind of small things like gold wire for the transistors and capacitors that does need to be automated, but that should be fairly easy to automate now that we have a more robust applied Energistics 2 system. But unfortunately, we are out of time for this episode of Forever Factory.